Growing up in our suburban home in Phoenix, Arizona, I learned early that love in our family came with conditions. My younger sister Madison was the sun around which our entire household revolved, while I was relegated to being a supporting character in the story of her brilliance. At 25, I could still feel the familiar sting of watching my parents' faces light up whenever Madison walked into a room, a reaction I'd never quite managed to inspire, no matter how hard I tried. "Rebecca, can you help Madison with her college applications?" Mom called from the kitchen as I walked through the front door after my shift at the local veterinary clinic. I'd been working there since graduating from Arizona State University with my biology degree, saving money and trying to figure out my next steps while living at home. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved working with animals and was slowly building toward my dream of veterinary school. Madison was sprawled across the living room couch, her laptop balanced on her knees, looking picture perfect as always. At 19, she had inherited Mom's delicate features and Dad's thick auburn hair, along with an effortless confidence that had carried her through high school as class president and valedictorian. She was now a sophomore at UCLA, majoring in communications with dreams of becoming a television journalist. "I don't need help," Madison said without looking up from her screen. "I'm just updating my LinkedIn profile. Some producer from Channel 7 News reached out about a potential internship." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Mom emerged from the kitchen, practically glowing with pride. "I knew that journalism camp we sent you to last summer would pay off. Rebecca, isn't that exciting?" I forced a smile, the same practiced expression I'd worn for years whenever Madison's latest achievement was announced. "Very exciting. Congratulations, Maddie." But Madison barely acknowledged my response, already absorbed in crafting her professional persona online. This was typical. Madison had perfected the art of accepting praise as her natural due, never seeming to notice or appreciate the support system that constantly lifted her up. "Rebecca, honey, could you start dinner?" Mom asked, already moving toward Madison's laptop to peer over her shoulder. "I want to see this LinkedIn message. A real producer. Can you imagine?" I headed to the kitchen, my jaw tight with familiar frustration. This scene had played out countless times over the years. Madison received opportunities and accolades while I handled the practical tasks that kept our household running. When Madison was in high school, I'd helped her with math homework while she complained about how boring it was. When she needed a car for her senior year, Dad bought her a brand new Honda Civic while I drove our ancient family minivan. When she got into UCLA, they threw her a graduation party with 50 guests. When I graduated from ASU, we went to dinner at Olive Garden. The pattern was so ingrained that I'd stopped questioning it years ago. Madison was special, beautiful, charismatic, destined for greatness. I was dependable, practical, hardworking, the one who could be counted on to handle whatever needed handling. Our parents had made these roles clear from early childhood, and we'd all accepted them as natural law. "Rebecca!" Dad's voice boomed from the living room. "Come see this video Madison made for her media class. It's incredible." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and returned to the living room, where the entire family was now gathered around Madison's laptop watching a polished news segment she'd produced about campus sustainability efforts. It was good. Madison had always been naturally telegenic and articulate, but what struck me wasn't the quality of her work. It was the way my parents watched her on screen with the kind of rapt attention and obvious pride that I'd spent my entire life trying to earn. "This is professional quality," Dad said, shaking his head in amazement. "Madison, you're going to be on national television someday. I can feel it." "The lighting is perfect," Mom added, "and your delivery is so natural. You're a natural-born star." Madison accepted their praise with a casual smile, as if having your parents worship your every accomplishment was perfectly normal. And maybe for her, it was. She'd never known anything different. "Rebecca's been doing really well at the vet clinic," I said, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. The comment came out sounding defensive and needy, like a child demanding attention. "That's nice, honey," Mom said absently, her attention still focused on Madison's video. "This editing is so sophisticated. How did you learn to do this?" I excused myself and went back to the kitchen to finish preparing dinner, feeling the familiar weight of invisibility settle over my shoulders. This was my life, existing in Madison's shadow, providing the practical support that allowed her to shine, while receiving the emotional scraps that were left over. But as I stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of being overlooked, or maybe it was the growing realization that I was 25 years old and still seeking approval that would never come. Either way, I found myself thinking about the acceptance letter that had arrived in my mail 3 days earlier, the letter I hadn't told my family about yet. The University of Colorado's veterinary program had offered me a spot for the fall semester. It meant leaving Phoenix, leaving my job, leaving the comfortable routine of being the responsible daughter who could always be counted on. It meant stepping out of Madison's shadow and into a life where my dreams mattered as much as hers did. I'd been carrying the letter in my purse for 3 days, reading it over and over, trying to work up the courage to tell my parents. But watching them fawn over Madison's latest achievement, I realized I was tired of waiting for the right moment, tired of hoping for encouragement that might never come. "Dinner's ready," I called out, setting plates on the dining room table. As my family gathered around the table, Madison immediately launched into a detailed description of her professors, her internship prospects, and her plans for next semester. Mom and Dad hung on every word, asking questions and offering suggestions, completely absorbed in the fascinating world of Madison's college experience. "What about you, Rebecca?" Dad asked during a brief lull in Madison's monologue. "How are things at the vet clinic?" The question felt perfunctory, asked more out of politeness than genuine interest, but it was the opening I needed. "Actually," I said, my heart racing, "I have some news. I got accepted to veterinary school at the University of Colorado. I start in August." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and my parents exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "Veterinary school?" Mom said finally. "Rebecca, that's a big decision. Are you sure you're ready for something that demanding?" The response hit me like a slap. When Madison had announced her acceptance to UCLA, there had been champagne and tears of joy and phone calls to relatives. When I announced my acceptance to a competitive graduate program, the first response was doubt about my capabilities. "I think I can handle it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been working in veterinary medicine for 2 years, and my grades were good enough to get in." "Of course, honey," Dad said quickly, clearly recognizing the hurt in my voice. "We're proud of you. It's just, Colorado is so far away, and veterinary school is very expensive." "Not as expensive as UCLA," I pointed out. "That's different," Madison interjected. "My program has national recognition. Journalism is a competitive field that requires the right connections and prestige." I stared at my sister, amazed by her casual assumption that her dreams were inherently more valuable than mine. "And veterinary medicine isn't competitive." "I didn't say that," Madison backtracked, but her tone suggested she thought exactly that. "When do you have to give them an answer?" Mom asked. "I already did. I accepted. I'm moving to Boulder in July." Another silence, this one longer and more uncomfortable than the first. "Well," Dad said finally, "I suppose congratulations are in order. It's just going to be strange having you so far away." Strange. Not exciting, not proud, not wonderful. Strange. The word crystallized everything I'd been feeling for years but had never been able to articulate. My achievements were strange, unexpected, somehow disruptive to the natural order of things. The weeks following my announcement were filled with a tension I'd never experienced in our usually harmonious household. My parents didn't forbid me from going to Colorado. They weren't that controlling. But their lack of enthusiasm spoke volumes. Instead of celebration, there were worried conversations about finances, logistics, and whether I was making the right choice. "Are you sure you've thought this through?" Mom asked for the 3rd time in 2 weeks as I researched apartments online. "Veterinary school is 8 years of your life, and there's no guarantee you'll find a good job afterward." I looked up from my laptop, fighting the urge to point out that Madison's communications degree came with even fewer job guarantees. "Mom, I've wanted to be a veterinarian since I was 12. This isn't a whim." "I know, honey, but dreams and reality are different things. Maybe you could take a year to think about it, save more money?" The suggestion was presented as practical advice, but I heard the underlying message. Stay safe, stay close, don't rock the boat. It was the same message I'd been receiving my entire life, dressed up as concern for my well-being. Madison, meanwhile, had become increasingly vocal about her own plans and achievements, as if my decision to leave had triggered some kind of competitive response. She'd arranged to spend the summer interning at a Phoenix television station, and our dinner conversations now revolved around her insights into local media and her growing network of professional contacts. "The news director said I have real potential," Madison announced one evening, cutting into her chicken with the kind of precise movements that made everything she did look effortless. "He thinks I could get hired as a weekend anchor within a few years of graduating." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Dad beamed. "You see? This is what happens when you pursue your passions in a practical way, in places where there are real opportunities." The comment was clearly directed at me, another subtle suggestion that my choice to leave Phoenix was somehow misguided. I'd grown used to these indirect criticisms over the past month, the way my family had of expressing disapproval without actually saying they disapproved. "Colorado has plenty of opportunities for veterinarians," I said mildly. "Of course it does," Mom said quickly. "We just worry about you being so far from family. What if you need help? What if something goes wrong? What she didn't say, but what I heard clearly was, what if we need help? What if something goes wrong here? Because that was the real issue, wasn't it? I wasn't just the overlooked daughter. I was the useful daughter. I was the one who drove Madison to the airport when she flew back to school, who helped Mom organize family gatherings, who remembered Dad's doctor appointments and made sure he took his blood pressure medication. I was the family's unpaid administrative assistant, and my departure would create a gap that someone else would have to fill. I'll only be a phone call away, I said, and I'll come home for holidays. It won't be the same, Madison said, and for a moment I thought I heard something like genuine sadness in her voice. Who's going to help me practice my presentations? Who's going to listen to my ideas? I looked at my sister with surprise. In all our years together, Madison had never directly acknowledged that I provided something valuable to her life. She'd always seemed to take my help for granted, accepting it as naturally as she accepted our parents' adoration. You'll figure it out, I said gently. You're good at adapting. But Madison's expression suggested that adapting wasn't something she'd had much experience with. When you've spent your entire life having problems solved for you and paths smoothed ahead of you, the prospect of navigating challenges independently can be overwhelming. As my departure date approached, I found myself observing my family dynamics, with the clarity that comes from stepping outside a situation. I began to notice things I'd missed when I was too busy participating. The way Madison automatically assumed that others would handle the practical details of her life, the way my parents enabled this assumption by jumping in to solve problems before she even recognized they existed. When Madison's car broke down during her internship, Dad immediately arranged for it to be towed and repaired without involving her in the process. When she struggled with her apartment's complicated lease agreement, Mom spent hours on the phone with the landlord working out the details. When she needed professional clothes for work, they took her shopping and bought her an entire wardrobe without expecting her to contribute financially. None of this was unusual. It was simply how our family had always operated. But as I prepared to leave, I began to wonder what would happen when I wasn't there to serve as backup support, to help carry the load of managing Madison's life. Rebecca, can you help Madison set up her new laptop? Mom called one Saturday morning. She's having trouble with the settings. I found Madison in her room, staring at her computer screen with the kind of helpless frustration that suggested she'd barely tried to solve the problem herself. What's wrong with it? I asked. I don't know. It's not working right. The email isn't connecting, and I can't figure out how to download my editing software. I sat down beside her and quickly identified the issues. Basic setup problems that could be solved in 10 minutes with a little patience and the willingness to read instructions. But as I fixed each problem, I realized this was exactly the kind of situation Madison would face constantly once I was gone. Maddie, I said carefully, you know I won't be here to help with stuff like this after July, right? She looked at me with genuine confusion. What do you mean? I mean, when you have computer problems or car trouble or need help with practical stuff, you'll have to figure it out yourself, or ask Mom and Dad. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something that might have been anxiety cross Madison's face. But you'll still help when you can, right? Like, over the phone? Sometimes, sure. But Maddie, you're 19 years old. You need to learn how to handle these things independently. Madison was quiet for a moment, and I could see her processing this information as if it had never occurred to her before. I guess I never really thought about it. You've always just taken care of stuff. The admission was both touching and troubling. My sister genuinely hadn't realized how dependent she'd become on others managing the practical aspects of her life. She'd been so focused on her goals and dreams that she'd never developed the basic life skills that most people her age took for granted. You're smart, Maddie. You'll figure it out. But as I watched her struggle with concepts that seemed foreign to her, reading instruction manuals, troubleshooting problems systematically, accepting that some things require patience and persistence rather than natural talent, I began to understand that my departure would be more disruptive than anyone had anticipated. I was the family's problem solver, the one who quietly handled the unglamorous but necessary tasks that kept everyone else's lives running smoothly. Without me, Madison would have to develop independence she'd never needed before, and my parents would have to confront the ways they'd inadvertently handicapped their golden child by never allowing her to struggle. The realization should have made me feel guilty about leaving. Instead, it made me more determined than ever to go. Moving day arrived with the brutal heat of a Phoenix summer and an emotional atmosphere that felt equally intense. I'd packed my belongings into my reliable Honda Accord, the same car I'd driven since college, purchased with my own money, while Madison received her shiny new Civic as a graduation gift. The contrast felt symbolic as I loaded boxes of books, clothes, and the few pieces of furniture I'd managed to accumulate during my years at home. Are you sure you have enough money for deposits and first month's rent? Mom asked for the fourth time that morning. hovering near my car with the nervous energy of someone who wanted to help, but didn't know how. "I'm sure, Mom. I've been planning this for months." What I didn't mention was that I'd been saving every penny for 3 years, working extra shifts at the vet clinic and living as frugally as possible while Madison's college expenses consumed most of my parents' discretionary income. The financial independence I'd built was hard-won and something I was genuinely proud of, even if my family seemed to view it as evidence of my impractical stubbornness. Madison emerged from the house carrying a small wrapped box, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. In the past month, as my departure became more real, she'd grown increasingly clingy, asking my opinion on everything from her internship outfits to her weekend plans, as if trying to stockpile my input before I became unavailable. "I got you something," she said, holding out the box with an awkward smile. "For your apartment." Inside was a small succulent in a ceramic pot painted with the words, "Sister's love grows anywhere." It was sweet and thoughtful, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to follow me around the house, desperate to be included in whatever I was doing. "Thank you, Maddie. I love it. I figured it would be easy to take care of since you'll be so busy with school." She paused, then added quietly, "I'm going to miss you." The admission caught me off guard. Madison rarely expressed vulnerable emotions, having learned early that confidence and self-assurance earned more attention in our family than neediness or uncertainty. "I'll miss you too," I said, and meant it. Despite years of feeling overlooked and undervalued, Madison was still my sister. I loved her, even when I didn't particularly like the person she'd become under our parents' constant praise and protection. Dad emerged from the house carrying a cooler filled with snacks for my drive, his face set in the determined expression he wore when trying to hide his emotions. "It's a long drive to Colorado. Make sure you stop every 2 hours to stretch and stay hydrated." "I will, Dad. And call when you get there. We'll worry until we know you're safe." The concern in his voice was genuine, but I couldn't help noticing that this was more parental attention than I'd received for any of my local accomplishments. It apparently took moving 800 miles away to become worthy of their focused worry. As I hugged each family member goodbye, I felt a complex mix of emotions: excitement about my future, sadness about leaving, and a strange kind of relief that I couldn't quite name. For the first time in my adult life, I was about to exist independently of Madison's shadow, to discover who I might become when I wasn't constantly comparing myself to someone else's effortless brilliance. "Drive safely, honey," Mom said, tears threatening to spill over. "And remember, if this doesn't work out, there's always a place for you here at home." The conditional nature of her support stung, but I smiled and promised to be careful. Then I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and drove toward a future that belonged entirely to me. The first few weeks in Boulder were exactly as challenging as I'd expected, finding my way around a new city, adjusting to the altitude, settling into a graduate program that demanded more of me intellectually than anything I'd ever attempted. But they were also exhilarating in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for veterinary medicine, professors who challenged me to think critically, and classmates who valued knowledge and dedication over natural charisma. I called home every Sunday, dutifully reporting on my progress and listening to updates about family life in Phoenix. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. Mom and Dad would ask polite questions about my studies, then launch into detailed accounts of Madison's internship successes and social activities. "Madison got to interview the mayor this week," Mom reported during our third weekly call. Her supervisor said she asked excellent questions and showed real journalistic instincts. "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased for my sister, while simultaneously noting that my own academic achievements, making it through my first round of exams, successfully completing my first lab rotations, generated much less enthusiasm. "She's thinking about applying for a summer program in Los Angeles next year," Dad added, "something that could really boost her career prospects. That sounds exciting for her." What I didn't mention was how liberating it felt to have conversations about my own life that didn't revolve around Madison's latest triumph. My new friends knew me as Rebecca, the veterinary student, not Rebecca, the sister of the brilliant and beautiful Madison. They valued my insights about animal behavior and my dedication to my studies. They saw me as a complete person, rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. But as September progressed, I began to notice changes in our family's Sunday phone calls. The updates about Madison's internship became more complex and less uniformly positive. "She's been having some challenges at work," Mom admitted during our 4th week. "Nothing serious, just some adjustments to the professional environment." "What kind of challenges?" "Oh, you know how demanding these media jobs can be. Long hours, difficult deadlines. Madison is used to being the star student, so it's taking some adjustment to be the newest person on the team." I read between the lines. Madison was struggling with the reality of being a beginner in a competitive field, where natural talent had to be combined with hard work and persistence, qualities she'd never needed to develop when everything came easily to her. "I'm sure she'll figure it out," I said. "It's probably good for her to face some challenges." The silence on the other end of the line suggested that my parents didn't share my confidence in Madison's ability to adapt to adversity. The phone call came on a Tuesday night in late October. Mom's strained voice immediately put me on alert. "It's Madison," she said. She lost her internship. Madison, the golden child who'd never failed at anything, had been fired from her dream job. What happened? According to her supervisor, she missed deadlines, showed up late repeatedly, and had conflicts with other interns. They said she expected special treatment and became defensive when given feedback. The pattern was familiar. Madison had always blamed external factors when things didn't go her way, never having developed the emotional skills to handle criticism or setbacks. "She's been in her room for 3 days, barely eating," Mom continued. "She keeps asking for you, says you always know how to solve problems." The irony was overwhelming. After years of being overlooked, Madison suddenly needed the practical problem-solving skills I'd developed while she'd coasted on natural ability. When I called Madison that evening, her voice was thick with tears. "Rebecca, I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart." For an hour, I listened as she poured out her frustrations. But then came something unexpected: honest self-reflection. "I guess I thought work would be like school," she admitted. "But they expected me to stay late, research boring background information, accept criticism without arguing. Nobody ever taught me how to handle not being the best at something." "It's not too late to learn," I said gently. "This is just one setback." Over the following weeks, our conversations became more frequent and honest. Madison started therapy, took an entry-level job at a local news website, and began developing the resilience she'd never needed before. Meanwhile, my parents were grappling with their own realizations. "We may have made mistakes," Dad admitted during a Sunday call. "We were so focused on celebrating Madison's successes that we never taught her how to handle failure." "We're proud of you," Mom added suddenly, "for having the courage to leave, for pursuing your dreams." Watching Madison struggle has made us realize how strong and independent you've always been. The acknowledgement meant everything, not because I'd been seeking their approval, but because they were finally seeing me clearly. As my first semester continued, I threw myself into veterinary studies with renewed purpose. I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who valued the same things I did. Madison was slowly rebuilding her career and confidence, learning to handle criticism with grace instead of defensiveness. It was painful growth, but real growth. Our family was learning too, that love doesn't mean protecting someone from all consequences, that building confidence requires allowing room for failure. The truth that emerged wasn't just about Madison's limitations or our parents' mistakes. It was about the danger of pedestals and the surprising strength found when you're finally forced to rely on yourself. I'd left Phoenix to pursue my dreams, but I'd inadvertently given my sister the gift of discovering her authentic self. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be someone's safety net and trust them to learn how to fly on their own.